Hello, my friend, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to slow all the way down. There is nowhere to be, nothing to solve, nothing to remember for tomorrow. Just my voice, low and even, and the quiet hum of something very small and very old, moving gently through the dark. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let your hands go loose and heavy at your sides. If you are lying down, feel the weight of your whole body sinking, just slightly, into whatever is holding you up. Good. Now close your eyes, if you haven't already, and come with me into a warm afternoon garden, because that is where our story begins. Imagine sunlight falling in long gold ribbons across a field of clover. The air is warm but not hot, the kind of warmth that makes your eyelids heavy just thinking about it. Somewhere nearby, a low, steady drone rises and falls like breathing. That sound belongs to a bee, and if you listen closely enough, you will notice it is not one single note but many, layered together, soft and round at the edges. It is the sound of thousands of small wings, beating so quickly that our eyes cannot quite follow them, somewhere between 200 and 230 times every single second. And yet, despite that impossible speed, the sound they make together is nothing like a rush or a panic. It is closer to a lullaby, a sound the world has been humming to itself for tens of millions of years, long before there were gardens, long before there were names for gold or clover or dusk. A honeybee's wings are strange and lovely things. They are not stiff like a wooden oar, but soft and flexible, bending and twisting through the air in a slight figure of 8, an infinite loop repeated again and again, a shape almost like the symbol for forever. This is not an accident. It is this gentle rotation, this looping stroke, that lets a bee lift itself into the air despite a body that seems, by all the ordinary rules, a little too round and a little too heavy to fly. For a long time, people found this puzzling, almost impossible, and there is a comfort in that, isn't there, my friend? The idea that something can defy the tidy rules we thought we understood, and still rise, quite calmly, into the light. Let's drift closer to the hive now, not rushing, just floating the way a leaf might float on a warm current of air. A hive on a summer evening is a soft, breathing city. Tens of thousands of bees live inside, and yet there is no shouting, no traffic, no confusion. Everything happens through touch and scent, and a language of tiny vibrations passed from body to body. When a forager bee returns from the meadow, heavy with pollen and nectar, she doesn't need to speak. She performs a dance, a small looping walk across the honeycomb, and in the pattern of that walk, in the angle of her body against the vertical comb, in the length of the straight run through the middle of the loop, she tells her sisters exactly where she has been, how far, in which direction, relative to the sun, whether the flowers were generous or sparse. It is called the waggle dance, and it is one of the only forms of abstract symbolic communication known anywhere in the animal world outside of our own species. A whole map of the afternoon, folded into a dance, and passed from one small body to another in the warm dark of the hive. Isn't that a lovely thing to hold onto as your breathing slows? A map made of movement, a story made of touch, no words needed at all. Let yourself sink a little deeper now. Feel the mattress or the couch or the chair beneath you rise up to meet your body, holding you the way the hive holds its bees, snug and warm and layered close together. Inside that hive, every bee has a role, quietly and without complaint. There is the queen, who is not a ruler in the way we might imagine, not issuing commands from a throne, but rather the heart of the whole colony, spending her days moving slowly across the comb, laying egg after egg after egg, sometimes more than 1,500 in a single day, each one tucked gently into its own six-sided cell. And there are her daughters, thousands upon thousands of worker bees, who will each move through a whole quiet lifetime of jobs inside those few short weeks they are given. When they are very young, they clean the empty cells, tidying the nursery for the next generation. As they grow a little older, they feed the larvae, then they help build the wax comb, then they guard the entrance, meeting each returning sister with a brief touch of antennae, checking her scent, making sure she belongs. And only in the last weeks of her life, does a worker bee become a forager, venturing out into the wide world of meadows and orchards and rooftop gardens to gather the nectar and pollen the whole colony depends on. There is something soothing in that structure, don't you think, my friend? Nothing rushed, nothing skipped. Each bee simply moves gently through her days, doing what is needed, trusting that the sisters before her did the same and the sisters after her will too. And tucked among all these sisters, a much smaller number of brothers drift quietly through the hive as well. These are the drones, and their lives move at a slower, gentler pace than the endless labor of the workers. A drone does not gather nectar. A drone does not build wax or guard the door or feed the young. A drone simply exists, softly, waiting for the one afternoon flight that may or may not come, when he might rise into the warm sky to meet a young queen from another hive far away. Most drones never get that chance, and yet the colony keeps them anyway, feeds them anyway, lets them rest in the warm, dark corners of the comb, because a colony, like a good and patient household, has room for those who are simply waiting for their moment, even if that moment is rare, even if it never comes at all. There is a kind of grace in that, isn't there? Room enough for everyone, without needing everyone to prove their worth every single day. Let's talk for a while about the comb itself, since it is really the bones of the whole hive, the quiet architecture that holds everything else in place. If you have ever seen a piece of honeycomb held up to the light, you will remember the hexagons, each one a small six-sided room, fitted so closely against its neighbors that there is almost no wasted space at all. Bees did not learn geometry from a book. They simply discovered, through countless generations of trial, that the hexagon is the most efficient shape there is, using the least wax to enclose the most space, with walls shared between neighboring cells so that no wax is spent twice. Mathematicians have proven, using long, elegant equations, that the hexagon truly is the most efficient possible tiling of a flat surface. Bees proved it first, with nothing but their own small bodies and the soft wax made in glands along their abdomens, warmed and shaped by the gentle heat of the hive. The wax itself begins as something almost like sweat, secreted in thin, nearly invisible flakes from between the segments of a young worker's abdomen. She reaches back with her legs, gathers the flake, and passes it forward to her mandibles, chewing it soft and warm, mixing in a little saliva until it becomes pliable enough to shape. Then, working alongside dozens of her sisters, all of them holding the same shared plan somewhere in their small, instinctive minds, she presses the wax into place, cell by cell, until a whole sheet of comb hangs down from the top of the hive like a curtain of small golden rooms. There is no architect giving instructions. There is no blueprint pinned to a wall. And yet the comb comes out almost perfectly uniform every time, each cell tilted very slightly upward, just a few degrees, so that the honey stored inside will not drip or spill, even on a warm day when the wax softens slightly in the heat. Feel your own breathing settle into a rhythm now, slow and even, like the quiet, repeated motion of a bee pressing one more hexagon into place, and then another, patient and unhurried, no rush at all, because the whole hive has all the time in the world, and so do you, right now, in this soft and quiet moment. Now let's follow one forager bee back out into the meadow, just for a little while, drifting low over the grass the way she does, close enough to feel the warmth rising off the soil. She lands on a flower, soft and sure, and something remarkable happens the moment her feet touch the petal. Bees can taste with their feet. Little sensors along their legs tell her almost instantly whether this flower is worth staying for, whether the nectar hidden deep inside is sweet and plentiful or thin and disappointing. If it is good, she lowers her long, thin tongue, called a proboscis, into the narrow throat of the flower, and draws the nectar up in slow, rhythmic sips, the way you might draw a milkshake through a straw, unhurried. Patient savoring. That nectar doesn't go into her stomach the way food goes into ours. It travels instead into a separate pouch called the honey stomach, a private storage chamber where it waits, untouched, mixing slowly with a gentle enzyme called invertase that begins, even during the short flight home, to transform the simple sugars of the nectar into something new. When she arrives back at the hive, she doesn't swallow this nectar at all. She passes it, mouth to mouth, to a waiting sister who passes it to another, and another, each transfer adding a little more enzyme, a little more transformation, the nectar growing thicker and sweeter with every gentle handoff, like a secret passed carefully down a long, warm hallway until it has changed almost entirely into what we would recognize as honey. Even then, the work is not finished. The honey is still too thin, too full of water to store for the long months ahead. So the bees spread it in a thin film across empty cells, and then, in perfect unison, hundreds of them turn to face the comb and begin to fan their wings, slow and steady, sending a soft current of warm air across the honey's surface. This fanning can lower the water content from something like 70% down to under 20, thick enough that it will never spoil, never ferment, never mold, even years and years later. Only once the honey has reached exactly the right thickness do the bees cap the cell with a thin lid of wax, sealing in that sweetness like a promise kept for a long, cold winter still many months away. Isn't that a comforting thought to carry with you as your eyelids grow heavier? All that patience, all that careful, unhurried transformation. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just steady hands or steady wings, doing the same gentle motion again and again until something simple becomes something lasting. Let's rest here a moment and think about how a bee actually sees the world she moves through, because it is nothing at all like the way we see it. And there is something almost dreamlike about it once you picture it properly. A bee's eyes are not two simple orbs like ours. Each of her two large compound eyes is built from thousands of tiny individual lenses, packed closely together like the cells of a honeycomb, each one capturing just a sliver of the world. And her mind stitches all those slivers together into a single mosaic view, grainy and soft at the edges, wonderfully suited to noticing motion and light rather than fine, sharp detail. And layered on top of those two large eyes are three more, tiny and simple, arranged in a small triangle on the top of her head, called ocelli, which do nothing but sense the brightness of the sky above her, helping her stay oriented, helping her know which way is up, even in the confusing tumble of wind and flowers and shifting shade. And the colors she sees are not our colors at all. A bee cannot see red the way we do. It fades for her into a kind of soft gray or black. But she can see far into the ultraviolet, a whole band of light entirely invisible to human eyes. And in that light, ordinary flowers reveal secret patterns we will never see with our own eyes alone, soft radiating lines leading down into the center of a petal like a quiet runway lit just for her, guiding her gently toward the nectar hidden at the flower's heart. Imagine that, my friend. A whole hidden language of light, painted across every meadow, invisible to us, obvious to her. The world is always more layered than it appears, more generous with its secrets than we usually notice. And somewhere out there, right now, some small flower is glowing in a color you and I have never once seen, and never will. Scent moves through the hive in much the same secret, layered way. Bees do not have noses as we understand them. They smell with their antennae, two delicate, bending wands covered in thousands of microscopic sensors, more sensitive to certain scents than almost any device human hands have built. A returning forager carries the scent of the flower she visited caught faintly in the fine hairs of her body, and her sisters can read, in that scent alone, a little of where she has been. The queen, too, speaks constantly through scent, a soft chemical hum called queen pheromone, spreading gradually through the hive as bees touch each other, antenna to antenna, body to body, reassuring the whole colony again and again that all is well, that the queen is present, that the family is whole. When that scent fades, even briefly, the hive grows quietly restless, and when it returns, a kind of calm settles back over everything, the way a house settles once someone beloved has come home and closed the door softly behind them. There is a particular scent, too, called the Nasonov pheromone, which returning bees release like a lantern held up in the dark, a gentle beacon calling lost or wandering sisters back toward the safety of the hive entrance. And there is another, the alarm pheromone, released only rarely, only when truly needed, a brief and urgent note in an otherwise gentle conversation, quickly overtaken again by the ordinary hum of calm, cooperative life. Even in danger, the hive does not stay alarmed for long. It returns again and again to quiet. Let that be true for you too, just for tonight. Whatever alarm you might have carried through your day, let it be brief, and let it fade now, the way it fades in the hive back into something calmer, something warmer, something almost like the low gold hum of a summer afternoon settling slowly into evening. Let's move forward now gently through the turning of the seasons, because a hive does not live in a single unchanging summer. It moves with the year, slow and patient, the way a tide moves, and there is something deeply calming in watching a whole colony breathe in and out with the months. In spring, everything wakes at once. The queen quickens her laying, sometimes doubling or tripling the number of eggs she leaves each day, and the population of the hive swells, almost like a held breath finally released, as thousands of new workers emerge from their cells to meet the flood of blossoms opening across orchards and meadows and roadside ditches everywhere at once. Summer is the season of abundance and labor, long, warm days spent foraging from sunrise to dusk, wax rising, honey thickening, the whole hive humming with quiet purpose. But it is autumn and winter that reveal something truly remarkable about these small creatures, something I think you will find soothing to picture as you drift off tonight. As the days shorten and the air cools, the bees do not panic, and they do not simply vanish into stillness the way some insects do. Instead, they gather. Every single bee in the hive moves inward, closer and closer together, forming a tight, living sphere around the queen, thousands of small bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, wing to wing, in the very center of the hive. This is called the winter cluster, and it behaves less like a crowd and more like a single, enormous breathing organism. The bees on the outer edge of that cluster, tightly packed and insulating, keep the cold at bay, while the bees in the warm center generate heat by trembling their flight muscles without ever moving their wings, a soft internal shiver repeated by thousands of bodies at once, enough to keep the very heart of the cluster warm, sometimes as warm as 90 degrees Fahrenheit, even while the world outside is buried in snow and the air around the hive itself is well below freezing. And here is the part I find most beautiful. The bees rotate. The ones on the cold outer edge do not stay there forever, freezing quietly while their sisters stay warm. Slowly, unhurriedly, over the course of the winter, bees from the warm center make their way outward, and bees from the cold edge make their way inward, trading places, sharing the burden of the cold evenly among the whole family, so that no single bee bears the hardest position for too long. Isn't that a lovely thing to carry into your own rest tonight? A whole colony, huddled close through the longest, darkest months, taking turns being the one who is coldest, so that everyone eventually gets to be warm. No bee is left alone at the edge forever. The whole cluster moves and shares and endures together until the light comes back and the clover blooms again, and the whole cycle begins its slow, familiar turn once more. There is another kind of turning I want to tell you about tonight, slower than a season, rarer than a winter, but just as gentle in its own way, and that is the turning of one colony into two. It is called swarming, and though the word sounds sudden and chaotic, the truth of it is really a long, careful, unhurried decision, made not by one bee but by many together over days. When a hive grows large and full, sometimes the old queen and a great portion of her workers decide, in their own quiet collective way, that it is time to leave and begin again somewhere new, leaving behind a portion of the family and a new young queen still growing in her cell to carry the old hive forward. Before they go, scout bees are already at work, flying out in many directions at once, searching the landscape for a new place to call home, a hollow tree, a quiet crevice in a stone wall, some sheltered cavity dry enough and roomy enough to become a new hive. When a scout finds a promising site, she returns and performs a dance, much like the waggle dance that tells of flowers, but this time telling of shelter. And here is the remarkable part. Other scouts fly out to check her claim for themselves, and if they agree the site is good, they begin dancing too, echoing her enthusiasm, adding their voices, so to speak, to hers. Meanwhile, other scouts are returning with news of other possible sites, dancing their own competing dances nearby. Slowly, gradually, over hours or even days, one dance begins to win out, not because any single bee commanded it, but because more and more scouts, independently convinced by visiting the site themselves, joined in supporting it, until a quiet, decentralized consensus is reached, a decision made by many small minds working in loose, patient agreement, with no single leader ever casting the deciding vote. Scientists who study this call it a form of collective intelligence, and it is honestly one of the most elegant examples of group decision-making found anywhere in nature. Thousands of tiny lives, no single one of them holding the full picture alone, arriving together, patiently, at exactly the right choice. Once the decision is made, the swarm rises together in a soft roaring cloud, and if you have ever seen one drifting slowly across a summer sky, you will know it looks almost like smoke, or like a living, breathing weather system, moving unhurriedly toward its new home, calm despite its size, because every bee within it already knows, in its own quiet way, exactly where they are going. Let your own mind drift like that swarm for a moment, unhurried, trusting, moving toward rest the way the bees move toward their new home, not with panic, but with a soft, shared certainty that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. Not every bee lives this way, in vast cooperative cities of thousands. In fact, most bee species in the world are nothing like the honeybee at all. There are more than 20,000 known species of bees on this earth, and the overwhelming majority of them live alone, each female bee building and provisioning her own small nest without any workers, without any queen, without any hive at all. Think of the mason bees, who seal their nests inside hollow stems or narrow holes in wood using little more than mud, gathered and pressed into place with quiet, patient care. Think of the leafcutter bees, who snip small, perfect circles from the edges of leaves, rose leaves especially, and carry them home to line their nests like soft green wallpaper. Think of the mining bees, who dig narrow tunnels into bare patches of soil, entire quiet neighborhoods of solitary tunnels sometimes clustered together in a sunny slope, each one still fundamentally a private, solitary home, even while surrounded by neighbors. And think, too, of the bumblebees, rounder and fuzzier than their honeybee cousins, who do live in small colonies, but only for a single season. A bumblebee colony rarely holds more than a few hundred members, nothing like the tens of thousands in a honeybee hive. And by the end of autumn, the whole colony fades away except for a handful of young queens, who each find a quiet, hidden place, sometimes underground, sometimes beneath a pile of soft leaves, and enter a long, still sleep through the entire winter, alone, waiting for spring to begin the whole gentle cycle again, all by herself, until her own daughters are numerous enough to help her. Every one of these bees, solitary or social, small or round, plays a part in something much larger than any single nest or hive, and that is the quiet, endless work of pollination. Picture, for a moment, an orchard in early spring, rows and rows of trees suddenly bursting into pale pink and white blossom all at once, as though the whole hillside exhaled softly overnight. Without bees drifting from flower to flower, brushing against the small dusty grains of pollen clinging to their legs and the fine hairs of their bodies, most of those blossoms would never become fruit at all. Apples, almonds, cherries, blueberries, squash. So much of what fills a kitchen table through the year depends on this quiet, unpaid labor performed without ceremony, flower after flower, all day, every warm day, all season long. Even the wildflowers scattered along a roadside, the ones nobody planted and nobody tends, depend on this same slow, patient visiting, this same gentle exchange of pollen for nectar, a partnership older than any farm, older than any orchard, stretching back tens of millions of years into a warm, blossoming past neither of us will ever see except in moments like this one, imagined together in the dark. And when the sun finally sets on all that labor, when the light softens into gold and then into gray and then into the deep blue of true evening, the bees too come home to rest. It might surprise you to know that bees sleep in their own particular way. A foraging bee, worn out from a long day of flight, will sometimes simply stop moving altogether inside the hive, her body still, her antennae drooping slightly forward, her wings folded quiet at her sides. Some bees, especially on cooler nights, curl up alone inside an empty cell, tucked in as neatly as a child beneath a blanket. Researchers who have watched them closely through the night have noticed something we recognize instantly in ourselves. Bees that are prevented from resting properly move more sluggishly the next day, forget the location of flowers they had already learned, and struggle to perform their waggle dances with the same clean, precise accuracy. Rest, it turns out, matters to a bee's mind and memory in much the same way it matters to ours. What you're doing right now, letting your body go still and heavy and slow, is not so different from what an exhausted forager does after a long day drifting from blossom to blossom. It is simply what a tired body is built to do, bee or otherwise, when the work is done and the dark has come, and it is finally, gently, time to rest. Let's go back now, gently, to the very beginning of a single bee's life, because there is something quietly miraculous in how it unfolds, and it might be a comforting thing to picture as your own mind loosens and drifts. It begins as a single, tiny egg, no bigger than a grain of rice, laid by the queen into the soft wax floor of a cell. Within 3 days, that egg becomes a small white larva, curled and pale, and for the next several days, nurse bees visit again and again, feeding it a rich, milky substance. For the very first 3 days of every single larva's life, whether she is destined to become a worker or a queen, she is fed this same substance, called royal jelly, produced in glands inside the heads of young nurse bees. After that, most larvae are shifted onto a simpler diet of honey and pollen. But if the colony needs a new queen, one larva, chosen simply because she is young enough, is kept on royal jelly alone for her entire larval life, and that single difference in diet is enough to change everything about her. She grows larger. Her body develops fully functioning reproductive organs, unlike her worker sisters. She will live not for a handful of weeks, but for years, sometimes 4 or 5, an entire different span of life, shaped only by what she was fed in those earliest, most formative days. It's a gentle reminder, isn't it, of how much care in the smallest, quietest moments can shape an entire life to come. Nothing dramatic, just food, offered patiently, again and again, by attentive sisters who will mostly never be thanked for it, and yet the whole future of the hive depends on their quiet, careful attention. Once a queen larva has grown enough, her cell is sealed with a cap of wax, unusually shaped, elongated and hanging down like a small peanut among the flatter, more numerous worker cells around it. Inside, she undergoes a slow, private transformation, the same wondrous unraveling and reweaving of a body that happens inside any bee's sealed cell. Larva quietly becoming pupa, pupa quietly becoming something entirely new, wings and legs and eyes assembling themselves in the warm dark, unseen, unhurried, patient. When she finally emerges, only about 16 days after that first tiny egg was laid, she chews her way out of her cell, and if there is already an old queen in the hive, or another young queen who emerged first, the two of them may seek each other out, because a hive, in the end, keeps only one. A young queen who does prevail leaves the hive after several days, on a clear, warm afternoon, and flies out to what is called a drone congregation area, a specific patch of open sky, sometimes used generation after generation, where drones from many different hives gather and wait, quite peacefully, for exactly this kind of afternoon. She mates in flight, high above the fields with a number of different drones, gathering enough stored reproductive material in these few afternoons to last her entire life, sometimes many years, without ever needing to mate again. Then she returns to her hive and settles into the long, steady, gentle work of laying eggs, day after day, season after season, the quiet heartbeat around which the whole colony continues to turn. Let's turn our attention now to something small and sticky and often overlooked, a substance called propolis, sometimes called bee glue. Foraging bees gather it not from flowers but from the resin of trees, buds, and bark, sticky and fragrant, and carry it home the way they carry pollen, tucked onto their legs. Inside the hive, this resin is mixed with a little wax and a little of the bee's own saliva, softened into a dark, workable putty. The bees use it to seal cracks and drafts in the walls of the hive, to smooth rough surfaces, to varnish the inside of cells before the queen lays an egg within them, and even to entomb small intruders that die inside the hive and cannot be carried out, sealing them away so completely that they cannot decay or spread disease through the colony. Propolis has natural antimicrobial properties, and in a very real sense, it keeps the whole hive clean and healthy, an invisible coat of varnish protecting thousands of lives at once, applied so quietly that most of us never even notice it is there. Guarding the hive is its own gentle, watchful profession. Certain worker bees, usually a little older than the very youngest nurses but not yet foragers, spend their days near the entrance, greeting each returning sister with a brief, careful touch of antennae, checking her scent against the shared scent of the colony. It is a soft, unhurried kind of security, more like a familiar nod between neighbors than any kind of harsh interrogation. Only when a stranger's scent doesn't match, some bee from another hive attempting to slip in and steal honey, do the guards respond more firmly, blocking the entrance, wings buzzing a little louder until the intruder gives up and drifts away. Even then, there is rarely violence. Mostly, it is simply persistence, the guards standing patiently in the doorway, unmoved, until the moment of trouble passes and the hive settles back into its usual quiet rhythm. A honeybee's sting, when it does happen, is really a last resort, not a first response, and it comes at real cost to her, since a worker bee stinger is barbed and often stays lodged in whatever she has stung, meaning she cannot simply fly away afterward the way a wasp might. It is not something offered lightly. Bees would almost always rather retreat, rather warn, rather simply drift off toward a calmer patch of clover than ever come close enough to sting at all. There is something almost gentle in that, even in a creature capable of defending itself so fiercely. Aggression truly is the last option, chosen rarely, and never without consequence to herself as well. Humans have known and loved these small, careful creatures for a very long time. In caves in Spain, there are paintings more than 8,000 years old showing a figure climbing toward a wild hive to gather honey, smoke curling upward, bees swirling calmly around the scene. The ancient Egyptians kept bees in long cylindrical hives made of clay and mud, moving them by boat along the Nile to follow the blooming seasons from south to north. For thousands of years afterward, across every continent where bees are found, people built hives from hollowed logs, woven straw baskets called skeps, clay jars, wooden boxes, each design shaped by the same simple wish: to live alongside these small creatures, sharing gently in the sweetness they made, without ever fully domesticating them, because bees, even now, remain something closer to a wild thing we have learned to live beside, rather than a creature we have ever truly tamed. Every jar of honey carries within it a quiet record of a particular place and a particular season, and that is one of the loveliest things about it. Honey made from orange blossoms in a warm southern grove tastes bright and citrus sweet, almost like sunlight itself. Honey made from lavender fields carries a soft floral hush. Honey gathered from buckwheat is dark, almost molasses-rich, deep and earthy. Honey from acacia trees is pale and delicate, so light in flavor it barely announces itself at all. Bees do not set out to create these different flavors on purpose. They simply gather what the season and the landscape offer them, and the honey that results is really a kind of edible diary, a quiet, sweet record of every flower a hive visited during the weeks that honey was made. If you have ever tasted two very different honeys side by side and wondered why they were nothing alike, that is the answer. Two different meadows, two different seasons, two different quiet stories written in nectar and carried home on small, tired wings. We spoke earlier of the waggle dance, the one that tells of distant flowers, but there is a gentler, simpler dance too, called the round dance, used when the food source is very close to the hive, sometimes just a few dozen meters away. In this dance, the bee does not need to indicate a precise direction, since the flowers are so near that her sisters can simply follow her scent outside and find them without much searching. So she simply moves in a small circle, first one way, then reversing over and over, a soft looping motion that essentially says, simply wonderful food, very close, come and see. It is such a small, unremarkable little dance compared to the elaborate waggle, and yet it carries its own kind of sweetness, doesn't it? The idea that some good things in life don't need an elaborate explanation at all. Sometimes it really is as simple as, come, it's close and it's good. Honeybees are not one single creature spread evenly across the world, either. What most of us picture when we imagine a honeybee is the western honeybee, found now on every continent except Antarctica. But there are other honeybee species too, each shaped by a different corner of the earth. In the warm forests of South and Southeast Asia lives the giant honeybee, who builds a single enormous comb, sometimes several feet across, hanging exposed from a cliff face or a high tree branch, with no walls or cavity around it at all, just a vast open curtain of wax and honey and thousands of clustering bodies, swaying gently in the open air. In the same region lives the dwarf honeybee, whose colonies are delicate and small, often no larger than a dinner plate, hidden among slender branches. And scattered throughout the tropics of Central and South America live the stingless bees, an entirely different lineage altogether, who defend their nests not with a sting at all, but with quiet, persistent biting, or simply by sealing entrances with sticky resin, going about their whole lives without ever needing the sharp defense their more famous cousins rely on. Let's look closely, just for a moment, at the small body of a forager bee, because even her legs carry a quiet kind of ingenuity. On the outer surface of each hind leg is a smooth, slightly concave patch called the corbicula, or pollen basket, fringed with long, curved hairs. As she moves from flower to flower, pollen dust clings to the branched, feathery hairs covering nearly her whole body, and periodically, hovering for just a moment in midair, she combs herself with her legs, gathering that scattered dust into a single, neat, packed pellet, moistened slightly with a little nectar so it holds together, and presses it into place in her pollen basket. By the time she returns to the hive, she may be carrying a pellet of pollen equal to nearly a third of her own body weight, in colors as varied as the flowers themselves. Pale yellow from dandelions, deep orange from poppies, dusty blue-gray from forget-me-nots, almost black from some kinds of clover. A single hive across a single season will bring home pollen in dozens of different shades, each one a tiny, quiet fingerprint of a flower visited and left a little lighter, a little further pollinated, for the visit. Her eyes, too, hold a secret beyond even the ultraviolet patterns we spoke of earlier. Bees can detect the polarization of sunlight, a subtle patterning in the sky invisible to us, but present even on a cloudy day, wherever a little sunlight filters through. This lets her calculate the sun's position and hold her direction steady even when clouds hide the sun itself, an internal compass built from light, refined over millions of years, letting her navigate confidently across open country that would leave most of us hopelessly lost. Some researchers believe bees may sense the Earth's faint magnetic field too, a further quiet thread in the vast, invisible web of orientation that lets a small creature, weighing barely 1/10 of a gram, fly out for miles across unfamiliar country and still find her way home, unfailingly, to one particular small entrance in one particular hive, among what might be dozens of other hives sitting in the very same field. A new bee does not simply set off into that wide world unprepared. Before her very first true foraging trip, a young worker takes what beekeepers call an orientation flight, a short, hovering loop just outside the hive entrance, rising a little, circling gently, taking in the landmarks around her, the shape of a nearby tree, the angle of the sun, the particular smell of this one hive among all the others nearby, so that hours or days later, tired and heavy with nectar, she will recognize her way home without hesitation. It's a small, careful ritual, isn't it? Taking the time to properly learn the shape of home before venturing out into the wider world. Perhaps there is something worth borrowing in that, some quiet lesson about pausing just for a moment to notice exactly where you are before setting out toward wherever you are going. On the hottest days of summer, when the sun presses down heavily on a meadow and even the grass seems to wilt a little at midday, a hive faces a different kind of challenge altogether. And once again, the bees answer it together calmly, without panic. If the temperature inside the hive climbs too high, threatening the delicate wax comb, which can soften and slump if it grows too warm, foraging bees switch their attention from nectar to something even more essential in that moment: water. They fly to ponds, puddles, bird baths, the damp edges of streams, anywhere they can find moisture, and carry it home in their honey stomachs the same way they carry nectar. Back at the hive, they spread this water in a thin film across the surface of the comb. And then, once again, hundreds of bees turn to face the same direction and begin to fan their wings in slow, coordinated unison, drawing air across the damp surface, cooling the hive through evaporation, the exact same principle as sweat cooling human skin, just achieved together communally, by thousands of small wings moving in patient rhythm rather than by any single body alone. There is another quiet form of communication worth pausing on here, called the tremble dance, used by a forager bee when she returns from the field to find that too few of her sisters are available to receive the nectar she carries, the whole system of mouth-to-mouth handoffs momentarily overwhelmed. Rather than growing frantic, she performs a soft, shaking dance, trembling her body gently as she walks, and this signal recruits more of her sisters to shift over to receiving duty, smoothing the bottleneck, restoring the gentle rhythm of the hive within a short while. Even in a moment of mild strain, the answer is never chaos. It is simply a small, clear signal, offered calmly, trusting that the family will adjust. Beekeepers watching a hive from the outside learn to read a great deal simply from the pattern of the comb itself. A healthy brood pattern looks like a solid, even sheet of capped cells, tightly packed with almost no gaps, evidence of a strong, prolific queen laying steadily, cell after cell, in careful, unbroken rows. And bees themselves are remarkably economical with the comb they build, reusing the very same cells generation after generation. A cell that once held a growing larva, once she emerges and leaves it behind, is cleaned out by young workers and used again, sometimes for another generation of brood, sometimes repurposed to store honey or pollen instead. The whole structure of the hive endlessly recycled, nothing wasted, nothing built new when something old and serviceable will do just as well. And when a beekeeper does gently add empty wooden frames to the top of a hive, frames beekeepers call supers, the bees do not need any instruction to know what to do with them. They simply begin building outward and upward, the same hexagonal instinct rising fresh in every new sheet of comb, whether it is the very first hive a young swarm has ever built, or the 1,000th generation of bees to work the exact same wooden box in someone's backyard. The instinct itself never ages. It simply gets carried forward quietly, wingbeat by wingbeat, from mother to daughter again, unbroken across centuries. Let's drift, for a while, even further back than any hive we have spoken of tonight, back across millions and millions of years, long before there were orchards or gardens or wooden hives at all, to a much older story. The slow, patient courtship between flowers and bees, unfolding across an almost unimaginable stretch of time. Long ago, the ancestors of bees were simply a kind of wasp, hunting other insects for food. But somewhere in that deep past, a shift occurred, so gradual it would have been invisible to anyone watching, generation to generation. Some of these early wasps began visiting flowers instead, drawn to the protein-rich pollen dusting their petals, and slowly, over unthinkable spans of time, their bodies began to change to suit this gentler way of living. Branched, feathery hairs developed to better catch pollen. Legs reshaped themselves into baskets for carrying it home. Sharp hunting instincts softened into something closer to careful gathering. And the flowers changed too in answer, because a flower that offered a little more nectar, a brighter color, a more inviting shape, was visited more often and pollinated more successfully. And so its own descendants spread further across the land than the flowers beside it that offered less. Slowly, the two lineages began shaping each other, flower and bee, bee and flower, back and forth, generation after generation, each one becoming a little better suited to the other, the way two long-time companions might slowly begin finishing each other's sentences, the fit between them growing closer and closer with every passing age. That is really what a flower's shape and scent and color are when you look closely. A long love letter, written slowly across millions of years, addressed to exactly the kind of visitor who might carry its pollen onward, and answered just as slowly by a small, humming creature perfectly willing to accept the invitation. This is why, if you look at almost any flower blooming in a meadow tonight somewhere in the world, even in the dark where you cannot see it, you will find some feature clearly meant for a bee's attention. A landing platform shaped just right for small feet, a nectar guide painted in ultraviolet, a scent released most strongly in the exact hours bees are most active, a shape that fits a bee's tongue like a key fits a lock built for it alone. Nothing about it is accidental. It is a whole quiet history of mutual devotion, growing in the ordinary corners of the world, so common that we mostly walk right past it without a second thought. And yet, in recent years, that ancient partnership has faced real strain, and I want to speak of it gently, honestly, but without letting it disturb the calm we've built together tonight. Bee populations in many parts of the world have struggled against disease and loss of the wildflower meadows they depend on, and the effects of certain pesticides used carelessly. It is a real concern, one that beekeepers and scientists and everyday gardeners have taken seriously. And in that concern, something hopeful has grown too. A wider, gentler attention paid to leaving small patches of clover unmown, to planting native flowers along roadsides and rooftops, to keeping a few hives tucked quietly in city gardens and countryside orchards alike. Millions of small, ordinary choices made softly by people who may never meet each other, all adding up to something like care extended outward toward a creature that has spent so many millions of years quietly caring for us in turn, whether we always noticed or not. People have honored bees in quiet ways for a very long time, long before anyone wrote a single word about pollination or ecosystems. In ancient Egypt, a bee was carved into hieroglyphs as a symbol tied to the king of Lower Egypt, a mark of quiet, gathered sweetness placed alongside images of great rulers. In ancient Greece, priestesses at certain temples were sometimes called Melissae, the bee women, and honey itself was poured out in offerings, considered a gift fit for gods as much as for mortals. Across many old cultures, mead, a wine made simply from honey and water and thyme, was often the very first fermented drink a community learned to make, long before grapes were pressed into anything, a slow sweetness turned by patient yeast into something warm and celebratory, shared at gatherings and weddings for thousands of years. Even much later, a small golden bee became a personal emblem chosen by an emperor, meant to symbolize industry, immortality, and quiet, resurrecting power, worn stitched into velvet robes. Because even then, centuries and centuries after those first cave paintings, people still reach for the bee whenever they wanted to say something about persistence, about sweetness earned through patient labor, about a small life that somehow outlasts and outshines its size. Scientists studying bees more closely in recent decades have found things that might genuinely surprise you, and I think you'll like hearing them as you drift further into rest. Bees, it turns out, can be taught to solve small puzzles, pulling a string to reveal a hidden reward. And once one bee in a colony learns the trick, other bees can learn it too, simply by watching her, a kind of social learning long assumed to belong only to much larger-brained animals. Bees also appear to be able to distinguish quantities, telling the difference between 2 and 3, and even, in careful laboratory studies, showing signs of understanding the concept of zero, of nothing, of an empty set, a concept human children usually don't fully grasp until they're several years old. And in a gentler kind of study, researchers have found that bees can be nudged into something like a more pessimistic or more optimistic outlook, depending on how they've recently been treated, shaken bees behaving more cautiously afterward, calmer bees approaching new, ambiguous situations with more openness. It's a strange, tender thought, isn't it, that even a creature this small might carry something like a mood, something shaped gently by the day it has just had, not so unlike the way your own mood tonight might soften simply because someone spoke to you kindly, low and slow, for a little while. On a rainy day, a hive knows to simply wait. Bees do not fly well in heavy rain. Their small bodies are too light, their wings too easily weighed down by water. So on a stormy afternoon, the whole colony stays home, tucked inside, guards still watching the entrance out of habit, but no one venturing out into the downpour. Forager bees that manage to sense the change in air pressure before a storm arrives will often return early, hurrying back with whatever nectar they've gathered so far, beating the rain by minutes, sometimes only seconds. And once safely inside, the whole hive simply settles, humming softly, waiting out the weather with the same patient calm it brings to everything else. No worry wasted on what cannot be controlled. No attempt to fly out into conditions that were never meant for such small wings. There will be other afternoons, sunnier ones, and the flowers, patient themselves, will still be there waiting. Let's watch the end of an ordinary day now, slowly, the way you might watch a candle burn down to its last soft inch of light. As afternoon tips over into evening, the light across the meadow turns from sharp gold to something rounder and rosier, and one by one, the foragers begin turning back toward home. There is no bell that rings, no signal passed down from above. Each bee simply senses in her own small body that the light is changing, that the flowers are closing their petals for the night, many of them folding inward the very same way your own eyes might be folding gently closed right now. And it is time, quietly, unhurriedly, to return. She rises from whatever bloom she has been visiting, catches the low evening light on her wings for just a moment, and turns toward the hive, following the same paths and shapes and remembered angles she first learned on that very first orientation flight, weeks ago now. A whole lifetime ago in bee years. At the entrance, the guards are still watching, though their vigilance has softened with the day, the same way a household settles once everyone is nearly home for the evening. Each returning forager touches antennae briefly with a guard, a small, familiar greeting repeated thousands of times as the light fades, and then disappears inside, into the warm, humming dark. Within the hive, the last of the day's nectar is passed from mouth to mouth. The last pollen pellets are brushed into storage cells, and gradually, the frantic motion of full daylight eases into something slower, quieter, more like a held breath being let out all at once, all together. Outside, the world is changing too. The birds that filled the hedgerows with song all afternoon grow quiet, replaced by the softer, rhythmic call of crickets rising from the grass, and somewhere further off, perhaps an owl, low and round-voweled, calling once into the deepening blue. The flowers that were so open and bright all day, drawing bees toward their centers with color and scent and light, begin closing their petals for the night, folding inward like small hands closing gently around something precious. And a few flowers, oddly enough, are only just beginning their day. Evening primrose unfurling pale yellow blossoms as the light fades, moonflowers opening their wide white faces to catch whatever moon there might be, offering their nectar instead to moths and other quiet night travelers who do their own gentle work while the bees rest. Because bees themselves, nearly all of them, are creatures of daylight. As true darkness settles over the meadow, the hive grows still in a different way than during a rain shower, less like waiting, more like settling all the way down into rest. The soft roar of thousands of wings fades into something closer to a low, steady murmur, the same murmur you might hear from a sleeping house, pipes settling and old floor creaking once, gently, before falling silent. And in that low murmur, thousands of small bodies breathe together, slow and unhurried, exactly the way I hope your own breathing is slowing now, matching itself, without even trying, to the same gentle, wordless rhythm. Bees themselves come in a far wider range of sizes than most people ever imagine, and there is something quietly delightful in picturing the smallest and the largest side by side. The tiniest bee known, a species called Perdita minima, found in the warm deserts of the southwestern United States, is barely larger than the head of a pin, so small it can be genuinely difficult to see resting on a flower unless the light catches her just right. At the other end of that gentle scale is Wallace's giant bee, found only on a few islands in Indonesia, a female of which can grow to nearly the length of an adult's thumb, with jaws large enough to gather resin for her nest the way a much smaller bee might gather pollen. For many decades, Wallace's giant bee was feared lost entirely, unseen by scientists for so long that some believe she no longer existed at all, until a small expedition, patient and hopeful, finally found her again resting quietly in a termite mound. Proof that even a creature that large can still slip quietly out of sight in a wide and folding world, and still be waiting there patiently to be found again. Beeswax itself has always traveled far beyond the walls of the hive. For centuries before easy electric light, beeswax candles burned longer and cleaner and sweeter smelling than nearly any other candle available, favored in churches and grand houses precisely because of that clean, honeyed scent released so gently into a room as the candle burned low through a long evening. Beeswax has softened lips through countless winters as balm, polished wood furniture to a warm glow for generations of careful hands, waterproofed thread and canvas and the tips of bowstrings, and even today finds its way quietly into countless candles, lotions, and salves, valued for the exact same soft, warm qualities that made it precious 1,000 years ago. It is strange and rather lovely to think that the same small hexagonal walls that once cradled a growing larva might, months later, end up as a candle glowing softly on someone's bedside table, the very last light they see before falling asleep, much like the light you might be imagining right now, low and gold, and gently flickering somewhere just behind your closed eyes. Inside her small body, a bee's own circulation works nothing like ours. She has no true network of veins and arteries carrying blood through separate channels. Instead, a simple, open system allows a fluid called hemolymph to bathe her organs directly, pushed gently along by a long, thin, tube-shaped heart running the length of her body, pulsing in slow, steady waves rather than one strong central beat. At rest, this pulse is slow and easy, but the moment she takes flight, everything inside her quickens considerably, her flight muscles contracting so quickly, over 200 times each second, that they actually vibrate faster than the nerve signals telling them to fire, resonating instead like a plucked string, tuned by the very shape and tension of her own small thorax, humming its familiar note purely through the physics of its own build, an instrument that plays itself once it is set trembling. That same trembling hum serves a purpose far beyond simply lifting a bee into the air. Certain flowers, tomatoes among them and blueberries and cranberries, hold their pollen tucked deep inside narrow tube-shaped anthers that will not release it easily to an ordinary visit. A bumblebee, arriving at such a flower, wraps her body around it and vibrates her flight muscles without ever unfolding her wings, producing a sharp, buzzing note at just the right pitch to shake the pollen loose in a small golden cloud, dusting her body thoroughly before she moves to the next flower and does the same again. Farmers and gardeners call this buzz pollination, and it is one of the quiet reasons an entire punnet of blueberries, or a full bowl of tomatoes, owes its existence to a sound too brief and too soft for most of us to ever notice happening, out there in a greenhouse or a garden row, one small buzzing note at a time. Our understanding of the waggle dance, the one we spoke of so early tonight, came from the quiet, patient decades of a scientist named Carl von Frisch, who spent much of his career simply watching bees, marking individuals with tiny dabs of paint so he could tell them apart, and recording, with enormous patience, every small movement they made upon returning to the hive. For years, many of his peers doubted that such a small creature could be communicating anything so precise as distance and direction through dance alone. It seemed too elegant, too abstract for an insect. But von Frisch kept watching, kept recording, kept testing his careful theories against the real, patient behavior of real bees in real hives, and eventually the evidence became undeniable. In 1973, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for this work, sharing it with two other researchers who had spent their own careers watching animals closely and patiently, until the animals themselves revealed their secrets. It is a gentle reminder, isn't it, that some of the deepest truths in this world are not hidden in complicated places at all, but simply waiting quietly to be noticed by whoever is patient enough to watch closely, and long enough, and without rushing to a conclusion before the small creature in front of them has finished its story. Today, that patient attention has spread into cities as much as countryside. Rooftops above busy streets in London and Paris and New York now quietly host their own small hives, tended by beekeepers who climb a few flights of stairs after work to check on a colony, working steadily above the noise and traffic below, gathering nectar from window boxes and park trees, and the flowering vines that climb over fire escapes. And far out in the wide agricultural valleys of California, whole trucks loaded with hundreds of hives travel through the night each February, following the almond bloom, so that by morning, an orchard stretching farther than the eye can see is suddenly humming with life again. Millions of bees temporarily relocated for a few weeks of intense, generous work before moving on again to the next bloom, the next valley, the next quiet job of turning blossoms into fruit for people they will never meet and never need to. Bees are far from the only small travelers doing this kind of work as the light changes through a day. While bees rest through the night, other quiet shifts take over the same soft labor. Moths, drawn to the pale, glowing blossoms of evening primrose and moonflower and night-blooming jasmine, drift through the dark on soft wings, guided by scent alone in the absence of daylight color. Certain bats in warmer parts of the world hover at the mouths of large tubular flowers like agave, lapping up nectar with long, delicate tongues, carrying pollen dusted across their fur from one towering desert bloom to the next. Hummingbirds work the bright red trumpet flowers most bees tend to overlook, since bees see red so poorly, hovering with a wing beat even faster than a bee's, sipping nectar through the brightest hours of the day. And beetles, slow and heavy and often overlooked entirely, shuffle through some of the oldest flowering plants on Earth, magnolias especially, pollinating them in a manner so ancient it likely predates bees themselves by tens of millions of years. All of this happens quietly, constantly, layered across morning and afternoon and evening and deep night alike, an unbroken relay of small winged and furred and shelled creatures, each taking their particular shift, so that no hour of the day or night ever passes with the flowers left entirely unattended. Let's return for a moment to something wonderfully strange that beekeepers sometimes notice on a warm evening, called washboarding. A number of bees will gather on the front of the hive, near the entrance, and begin rocking gently back and forth, front legs scrubbing lightly at the wood beneath them, all in a loose, unsynchronized rhythm, like a small crowd swaying very slightly to music only they can hear. No one is entirely certain why bees do this. Some think it may help clean or smooth the surface of the hive. Some think it may simply be a way of releasing a bit of excess energy on a warm, quiet evening when there isn't quite enough work left to do. Whatever the true reason, it is a strangely soothing thing to watch. Dozens of small bodies swaying in gentle unison for no reason anyone can fully explain, content simply to rock quietly together as the evening settles in around them. Perhaps not everything needs an explanation. Perhaps some things are simply done because they feel good to do, in the last soft hour before rest. A single forager, across the whole short span of her flying life, might travel a genuinely astonishing distance. Researchers who have tracked bees carefully estimate that many workers fly the equivalent of 1.5 times around the entire Earth, measured in total miles logged trip after trip after trip, just to gather enough nectar to contribute her own small share to the hive's supply. And to produce just 1 pound of honey, the collective hive must visit something in the neighborhood of 2 million individual flowers, a number so large it becomes almost meaningless, until you picture it not as a number at all, but as an unbroken, patient river of small journeys, each one so small on its own, each one meaning almost nothing alone, and yet together, drop by drop, becoming something as substantial and golden and lasting as a full jar of honey sitting on a kitchen shelf. Honey's patience with time is almost impossible to overstate, and there is one story about it I find particularly comforting to picture as the night grows later. When archaeologists opened certain sealed jars inside ancient Egyptian tombs, some of them thousands of years old, sealed away in the dark alongside kings and their treasures, they occasionally found honey still resting quietly inside, and in some remarkable cases, that honey was still edible, its natural sugars and low moisture having kept it safe from spoiling across a span of time longer than most civilizations have existed. Think of that for a moment. A jar filled in a warm hive by small, busy bodies working beneath an ancient sun, sealed in wax, sealed again in stone, resting untouched and unspoiled through thousands of years of empires rising and falling above it, waiting quietly in the dark the whole time, patient in exactly the way honey always is, for someone, eventually, to open the lid again. A hive's population itself breathes in and out across the year almost like a slow, single lung. In the depths of winter, a colony might hold only 10 or 15,000 bees, clustered tightly for warmth, conserving everything. By the height of summer, when flowers are most abundant and the queen is laying at her fastest pace, that same colony might swell to 50 or even 60,000 bees, filling every corner of the hive with warmth and motion and industry. Before autumn arrives again and the numbers slowly, gently recede, workers finishing their short lives, fewer new bees being raised as the days short, the colony settling back down toward its smaller winter size, patient and unafraid of the smallness, because it has learned. Across countless generations, that summer's abundance will always return in its own good time. If you have ever wondered what flowers a bee truly loves best, on an ordinary afternoon with the whole meadow open to her, you would likely find her lingering longest at lavender. Its narrow purple spires humming audibly on a warm day with the sheer number of bees working each stalk. She loves borage too, with its small star-shaped blue flowers that seem to refill their nectar within minutes of being visited, an endlessly generous little flower that keeps foragers returning again and again to the very same patch all afternoon. She loves catmint, and time left to flower along the edge of a garden path, and the wide, patient faces of sunflowers, whose central disk is really thousands of tiny individual flowers packed together, each one worth a visit in turn. Even a small, unmanicured patch of clover left growing in the corner of an ordinary lawn can hum steadily with foragers all day long, more welcoming to a tired bee, in its own humble way, than the most carefully trimmed and chemical-treated grass could ever be. Sometimes the kindest gift a garden can offer is simply permission to be a little wild, a little unmowed, a little generous with what it lets bloom. If you were to look closely at a piece of comb that has been part of a hive for several years, you would notice it is no longer the pale, almost translucent gold of freshly made wax. Older comb darkens gradually, deepening toward amber and then toward a rich, warm brown, stained slowly over time by propolis, by the passage of countless small feet, by the residue of thousands of larvae having grown and emerged within those same walls, generation after generation. Beekeepers sometimes rotate older comb out of a hive after a few years, giving space for fresh, pale wax to be built again. But there is something quietly moving about that darkened old comb too, a physical record of years of quiet labor, layered and deep in the way the rings of a tree record its years, or the way a favorite wooden spoon slowly polishes itself smooth and dark through years of ordinary use. Not every visitor to a hive arrives with honest intentions, and it's worth speaking gently of this too, since even here, the story stays fairly calm. In late summer and early autumn, when nectar in the wider landscape grows scarce, bees from a weaker or hungrier hive will sometimes attempt to slip into a neighboring hive and steal its stored honey, a behavior beekeepers simply call robbing. The resident guards usually are equal to the task, and most robbing attempts are turned away at the entrance, met with firm blocking and a little extra scrutiny of scent, until the would-be robbers give up and drift off elsewhere. It's a reminder that even in a world built mostly on cooperation, a little competition exists too, quietly at the margins, and the answer to it is not fear but simply steady vigilance, calmly maintained, day after day at the door. When a hive loses its queen unexpectedly, through age or accident or simple misfortune, it does not fall into panic, and I think this might be my favorite example, yet of just how composed a colony can remain under real strain. Within hours, the workers sense her absence, mostly through the fatting of her pheromone throughout the hive, and they respond immediately and calmly by selecting several young larvae, no older than 3 days, and begin feeding them the rich diet of royal jelly usually reserved only for a queen in the making. They build out several emergency queen cells around these chosen larvae, larger and more elongated than ordinary cells, and within roughly 2 weeks, new queens begin to emerge, ready to compete gently for the role, until one prevails and the hive continues onward, its rhythm barely interrupted at all. There is no crisis meeting, no long deliberation. Just a swift, practical, almost business-like response, the whole colony simply doing precisely what needs to be done, and trusting the process to sort itself out the way it always has. Before a new queen even emerges, sharp ears pressed close to a hive might catch a strange, thin, trumpeting sound coming from within the sealed queen cells, a sound beekeepers call piping. It's the sound of a nearly fully formed queen, still sealed inside her cell, testing her voice, so to speak, sometimes answered by a rival queen's piping from another cell nearby, 2 small trumpets calling back and forth through the wax walls separating them. A strange and oddly musical little duet, taking place entirely in the dark, entirely out of sight, days before either of them will ever actually meet face to face. Across the world, honeybee populations carry their own regional character, shaped gently by the particular climate and history of the place they settled. The bees kept across much of Europe and North America descend mostly from gentle, well-studied lineages, chosen over generations of careful breeding for calm temperament and steady productivity. But in the middle of the last century, a lineage originally brought to Brazil from parts of Africa, hopping to improve honey yields in a warm tropical climate, escaped captivity and spread gradually northward across the Americas, mixing with local populations along the way. These bees, often called Africanized honeybees, are typically more defensive of their hives, quicker to respond to disturbance near the entrance, though still in their own way, simply following the same old instinct every honeybee carries. Protect the queen, protect the brood, protect the sisters, protect the sweetness stored so carefully within. It is less a story of a fiercer creature, and more a story of the same ancient loyalty, simply expressed with a shorter fuse, shaped by a landscape with different pressures and different histories of predators and drought. Step close to any healthy, thriving hive on a warm afternoon, and you will notice the air around it carries its own particular fragrance, layered and warm, utterly unlike anything manufactured. There is the sweet, faintly floral note of honey itself, and beneath it, something a little more resinous and woody, the scent of propolis sealing every crack and seam. There is a soft, waxy note too, almost like a lit candle just blown out, and threaded through it all, something faintly sweet and green, the mingled trace of 1,000 different pollens brought home that same day from 1,000 different blossoms. Beekeepers often say they can tell a great deal about a hive's health simply by leaning close and breathing in, the way you might sense, without needing to be told, whether a kitchen down the hall is baking bread or simmering something gone slightly wrong. A healthy hive smells, more than anything else, like patience turned into sweetness, slow and warm and utterly unhurried. Even our own language carries small, affectionate fingerprints left behind by bees, tucked into phrases we use so often we rarely stop to notice where they came from. To call someone busy as a bee is to reach back, without even realizing it, towards centuries of watching these tireless little foragers move constantly from bloom to bloom from dawn until dusk. To say something is simply the bee's knees, meaning it is wonderful, delightful, exactly right, is to borrow a strange, cheerful little phrase from 100 years ago whose exact origin nobody fully agrees on, though it has stuck around all the same, warm and nonsensical and fond. And the word honeymoon itself, that soft, golden word for the earliest, sweetest weeks of a marriage, is thought by many to descend from an old custom of drinking mead, honey wine, through the first month of a new marriage, each cycle of the moon marking another month of that early sweetness, slowly savored, the way honey itself is always savored, a little at a time, never all at once. Let's slow down again for a moment and simply sit inside a picture together, my friend, because sometimes the facts matter less than the feeling of the place they live in. Picture a low stone wall at the edge of an old garden, warmed all day by the sun, moss softening its corners, small yellow flowers, maybe a mullein or a toadflax, growing up through the cracks between the stones. A single bee lands on the wall's sun-warmed surface, not foraging now, simply resting for a moment, wings folded, antennae drooping slightly forward, soaking in the last heat of the day before the stone begins to cool with the evening. Nearby, a wooden gate creaks softly on its hinge, pushed gently by a breeze too faint to really call wind at all. Somewhere past the garden's edge, a dog barks once lazily, then falls quiet again. This is not a moment that will be remembered by anyone, not written down, not photographed, simply lived once quietly by one small tired bee and the warm stone beneath her. And yet it is also in its own small way complete. Nothing missing from it, nothing more needed. Just warmth and stillness and a soft late light falling evenly across an old garden wall. A bee's tongue, when you look closely at how it actually works, is a small marvel of engineering, built not as a single simple tube but as a long, flexible structure fringed with fine hairs, which she can extend and retract with astonishing speed, sometimes lapping at nectar nearly 10 times each second, drawing thin nectar up through capillary action along those fine hairs almost the way a paintbrush draws up watercolor, then curling the tongue back into a tube shape to draw thicker, more viscous nectar up more like a straw. Along the edges of her mouthparts, and indeed across her antennae and even the tips of her legs, are clusters of exquisitely sensitive taste receptors, capable of detecting sugar concentrations so subtle that she can distinguish between two flowers most of us would consider equally sweet, choosing confidently, again and again, the very slightly better one. Her brain, for all this sensitivity, is smaller than a single grain of rice, holding somewhere around 1 million neurons, compared to the many billions humans carry inside our own skulls. And yet within that tiny space, she holds a working memory of dozens of flower locations, a mental map of the surrounding landscape built from her orientation flights, the learned meaning of dozens of chemical scents, the choreography of at least 2 distinct dances, and the ability to learn entirely new tasks by simply watching another bee perform them. It is a small, humble reminder that vastness of mind is not always about size, that a great deal of wisdom, a great deal of careful, patient competence can be folded into something smaller than a grain of rice, so long as every part of it is used well, and used gently, and never wasted. There is a quiet piece of history behind the modern wooden hive itself, the kind you might picture sitting in a sunny corner of an orchard, and it comes down to a single, rather elegant idea. For a long time, beekeepers who wanted to check on their bees or gather honey had to cut into fixed comb, destroying much of the hive's careful architecture just to see inside, disturbing the bees considerably in the process. In the middle of the 1800s, a clergyman and amateur beekeeper named Lorenzo Langstroth noticed something simple but profound. Bees, left with a gap of roughly 3/8 of an inch between surfaces, will leave that gap open as a passageway rather than filling it with wax or propolis. But anything narrower, they will seal shut, and anything wider, they will fill in with comb. Using this one small measurement, which beekeepers now simply call bee space, he designed a hive with movable wooden frames spaced exactly that distance apart, allowing each frame of comb to be lifted out individually, inspected, gently returned, without ever cutting into the bee's own careful construction. That same basic design, refined only slightly, is still the most common hive in use anywhere in the world today, all resting on the quiet observation of one small, consistent preference, held by creatures far too small to ever know they had been so carefully listened to. When a beekeeper does open a hive to check on its residents, the ritual itself is slow and deliberate, almost ceremonial in its calm. A small amount of smoke, usually from a handful of dried grass or wood chips smoldering gently in a metal smoker, is puffed softly around the entrance and beneath the lid before it is even lifted. The smoke doesn't harm the bees at all. It simply masks the alarm pheromone that might otherwise spread quickly through the colony and triggers an old, deep instinct in the bees to begin filling their honey stomachs, an old defensive response to what their ancestors would have registered as the possible approach of wildfire, preparing to evacuate with as much stored food as possible. A bee with a full stomach, it turns out, is also a calmer bee, less inclined to sting, and so this simple trick, discovered by keepers many generations ago, lets a whole hive be gently examined, frame by frame, with barely a ripple of disturbance passing through the calm, steady hum inside. In leaner seasons, when nectar runs short, whether from an unusually dry summer or an early frost cutting a blooming season short, thoughtful beekeepers sometimes offer their bees a simple sugar syrup, mixed at home from ordinary sugar and water, set out near the hive entrance in a shallow dish or a specially designed feeder. It is not honey, and it will never quite replace the rich complexity of real nectar gathered from real flowers, but it is enough in a pinch to help a struggling colony make it through until the next real bloom arrives. There is something tender in that gesture too, isn't there? A human quietly stepping in just enough, just for a season, to help a small, tireless colony catch its breath before the meadows fill with flowers again. When a hive grows strong and crowded, sometimes a beekeeper will choose to help it along a path it might have taken on its own anyway, gently dividing one thriving colony into two, a practice called splitting. A portion of the bees, along with several frames of brood and honey, are moved into a fresh, empty hive box, and if that new box is left without its old queen, the bees within it will simply do what bees always do when they find themselves without one. Select a young larva, begin the rich diet of royal jelly, and raise a new queen of their own within a couple of patient weeks. What was one hive becomes two, both a little smaller for a while, both perfectly capable of building back up to full strength by the time the flowers are at their most abundant. It is, in its own way, simply a gentler, more deliberate version of the very same swarming instinct we spoke of earlier, guided just slightly, but never truly controlled by the quiet hand of someone who has learned over years to work with the bee's own instincts rather than against them. A bee's sting, when examined closely under a microscope, turns out to be a barbed, slightly curved needle attached to a small venom sac, and the venom itself is a complex little cocktail of proteins and enzymes, evolved purely to cause enough discomfort that a threat, whether a curious badger or an unlucky beekeeper's hand, will withdraw and not return. It is not cruelty. It is simply the last line of defense for a creature with no claws, no sharp teeth, nothing else at all to protect the sweetness she and her sisters have spent so many patient hours gathering. And even then, as we mentioned earlier, she offers it only when truly cornered, preferring almost always simply to fly away, to warn, to buzz a little louder, long before ever resorting to something that will cost her so much. Modern hives do face one persistent, quiet challenge worth mentioning gently before we drift onward. A small parasitic mite, no larger than a pinhead, that can weaken a colony slowly over a season if left unchecked, feeding on developing brood and occasionally spreading illness between colonies. Beekeepers watch for it carefully, checking their hives with the same patient attention Langstroth once brought to his own bees, treating early and gently when it appears, because a healthy hive, tended with care, can usually recover its full strength given enough time and enough of the right kind of attention. It is simply one more small challenge among many that a colony, and the people who care for it, learn to meet steadily, without panic, the same way they meet a rainy afternoon or a cold winter, patiently together, one careful season at a time. As autumn deepens and the last blooms fade from the meadow, a hive makes one more quiet, practical decision that might sound a little hard-hearted at first, though I think, looked at closely, it is really just another form of the same patient wisdom we've seen again and again tonight. The drones, those gentle, unhurried brothers who spent the summer simply waiting for a mating flight that mostly never came, are no longer fed as generously as the colder months approach. Eventually, many are gently nudged out of the hive entirely by their sisters, left to spend their last days outside in the cooling air, since a drone consumes food without gathering any, and a colony preparing for a long winter with limited stores cannot always afford to keep feeding mouths that will not help it survive until spring. It is not cruelty so much as a hard, practical arithmetic, softened as much as it can be by every other gentleness the hive extends the rest of the year. And by spring, when warmth returns and resources grow abundant again, new drones will be raised once more, welcomed back into the same unhurried, waiting role their fathers once held. Across the far side of the world, in the eucalyptus forests and open heathlands of Australia, an entirely different set of bees goes about its own version of this same quiet work. There is the blue-banded bee, a solitary species with striking metallic blue stripes across her abdomen, who sleeps at night gripping a twig or stem with her mandibles alone, legs tucked in. Dangling gently in the dark like a tiny, sleeping pendant, there is the teddy bear bee, round and golden and fuzzy enough to genuinely resemble the toy she's named for, burrowing her own solitary nest into sandy soil. Neither builds anything like a honeybee hive. Neither stores honey for a whole colony to share. Each simply tends her own small nest, alone, generation after generation, and yet each is just as essential in her own quiet corner of the world to the wildflowers and native trees that depend on her for their own patient, generational continuity. In Japan, a native honeybee smaller and darker than the more commonly kept Western honeybee has been tended in traditional hollow log hives for centuries, prized for a particularly nuanced, complex honey, and for a fascinating defensive behavior found almost nowhere else. When a hornet, a serious predator of honeybees, attempts to enter the hive, dozens of workers will suddenly surround it in a tight, trembling ball, vibrating their bodies so intensely that the temperature inside that living ball rises above what the hornet can survive, though remaining just below the threshold the bees themselves can tolerate, an extraordinarily narrow, precise act of collective sacrifice and defense. The whole cluster working together to raise a temperature no single bee could safely produce alone, protecting the colony through nothing but numbers, unity, and an almost unbelievably fine-tuned tolerance for heat, shared exactly evenly among everyone holding on. Even the wind itself is something a foraging bee learns to read and answer, adjusting her flight path in small, constant corrections, tilting her body, angling her wings, so that a headwind pushing steadily against her becomes simply one more variable to solve rather than an obstacle to fear. On a gusty day, watch closely enough, and you'll see her flight path wobble and correct, dozens of times within a single short journey home, each tiny correction so smooth and practiced that from any real distance, her flight still looks steady, still looks calm, still looks, somehow, entirely unbothered by a wind that would have you and me pulling our coats a little tighter around our shoulders. Let's follow one single bee now, just one, from the very start of a single ordinary day, slowly, without hurrying through any part of it, because I think there is something deeply calming in following one small, complete life through just 24 quiet hours. Before dawn, while the meadow outside is still gray and cool and hushed, she wakes inside the dark warmth of the hive, nestled among her sisters, and for a while she does very little at all, simply resting, antennae still, wings folded neatly along her back. As the faintest gray light begins touching the hive entrance, some inner sense, tuned to the same slow turning of the earth that wakes birds and opens certain flowers, stirs her gently awake. The air inside the hive is still cool, too cool yet for flight, so before she ever steps toward the entrance, she begins to shiver, gently vibrating her flight muscles without unfolding her wings, warming her own small body from the inside, the same trembling hum we spoke of earlier, now used simply to bring herself up to a temperature where flight becomes possible at all. By the time she reaches the entrance, the sun has cleared the horizon, and the meadow beyond has begun to glow gently, dew still clinging to the grass, catching the early light in small, scattered points of brightness. She pauses only a moment at the entrance, touching antennae briefly with a guard, and then rises into the cool morning air, wings finding their rhythm quickly now that she's warm, and sets off toward a patch of clover she remembers from the day before, its exact location held steady in that small, remarkable mind of hers. The clover, too, is only just opening in the early light, petals unfurling slowly, and she is among the very first visitors of the day, drawing up the night's accumulated nectar before the warming sun causes too much of it to evaporate away. The middle of her day passes in a long, unhurried rhythm of familiar motion. Land, taste, drink, comb pollen into her baskets, rise, fly, land again. By midday, with the sun directly overhead and the air at its warmest, she returns briefly to the hive, passes her gathered nectar to a waiting sister, rests only a few minutes in the cool shade of the entrance, and heads out again, perhaps to a different patch this time, a stand of wild thyme she noticed on yesterday's flight, its scent finally strong enough today to be worth the visit. The afternoon brings longer shadows, gentler light, and a certain heaviness beginning to settle into her wings, an accumulated tiredness she carries the same unhurried way she carries everything else, without complaint, without rushing the last few visits of the day. And then, as the light turns gold and then rose, she makes her final flight home, the same path she has flown dozens of times today, familiar now down to the smallest landmark, and settles at the entrance for the last time, passes off her final small offering of nectar, and finds a quiet, empty cell somewhere in the depths of the darkening hive, curling in gently, antennae drooping forward, wings folding still. Tomorrow she will do this again, and the day after that for as long as her short, complete life allows her to. And tonight, right now, in this very moment, she is simply resting, the way I hope you are resting too, her whole small, extraordinary day finished, nothing left undone, nothing left to worry over, just the soft dark and the warmth of her sisters pressed close around her and sleep. Poets have long felt a quiet kinship with bees too, drawn again and again to their patient industry, their strange dual nature of softness and sting, their small lives lived so fully within such a short span of time. One poet, writing alone in a quiet upstairs room in New England more than a century and a half ago, filled page after page with bees and clover and the small, bright dramas of an ordinary garden, finding in them an entire private language for wonder, for loss, for the fleeting brightness of any single afternoon. Decades later, another poet, living for a time on an old farm in the English countryside, kept her own hives and wrote of them with a kind of fierce, careful attention, watching the bees settle in their new white boxes, and finding in that quiet, ordinary act something that felt to her like a whole world settling into place. Across so many years and so many different pens, it seems the bee has always offered writers the same quiet gift, a small, patient mirror in which something much larger, something about persistence, about sweetness, about the brief and busy nature of any one life, can be seen a little more clearly. The queen herself, though she is so central to everything the colony does, lives a life that is in some ways the least free of anyone in the hive, and there is a strange, gentle irony worth pausing on there. She rarely leaves the darkness of the hive at all after her one brief mating flight, spending nearly every remaining day of her long life within the same warm walls, tended constantly by a rotating retinue of young attendant bees who groom her, feed her rich royal jelly by mouth, and clear away her waste, freeing her from every task except the singular, endless work of laying eggs, cell after cell after cell, sometimes without even pausing to rest for more than a few moments at a time. It is not a throne so much as a quiet, endless devotion to one long, repeated task, hour after hour, for years on end, her whole world narrowed down to the comb directly in front of her, one cell, and then the next, and then the next, patient beyond anything we could easily imagine holding onto ourselves. Honeybees, it's worth remembering, were not always found everywhere they live today. Before European ships crossed the Atlantic centuries ago, there were no honeybees anywhere in the Americas at all, though thousands of native bee species, solitary and social alike, had already been quietly pollinating that whole vast landscape for millions of years beforehand. The honeybee arrived as a careful, deliberate act of transport, small wooden hive boxes carried below deck across months of rolling ocean, until they were finally set down on new soil, in a new hemisphere, and simply began again, the way bees always begin again, building comb, raising brood, sending scouts out to map an entirely unfamiliar meadow, patient and adaptable enough to make a whole new continent feel, eventually, like home. And now, my friend, let's try something a little different, just for a while, since your breathing has likely slowed a great deal by now, and your thoughts may already be drifting loose at the edges. Imagine, just imagine that you could shrink down gently and painlessly, the way things sometimes do in dreams, smaller and smaller, until you were no larger than a single bee yourself, resting in the warm dark of a hive among thousands of soft, humming bodies. Feel how different the world would seem from down there. The walls of wax around you would rise like smooth, golden cliffs, warm to the touch, faintly sweet in the air. The hum of your sister's wings, so ordinary from a human's height, would surround you now like a low, steady tide, rising and falling. Never quite silent, never quite loud, simply present, simply constant, like a heartbeat that belongs to something far larger than any one of you alone. Imagine curling into an empty cell for the night, the 6 smooth walls fitting close around your small body, not tight, not confining, just snug, the way a favorite blanket fits close around your shoulders on a cold night. Above you, through layers of wax and softly moving bodies, you might sense more than see the faint warmth of 1,000 small breaths, 1,000 small heartbeats, all slowing together as the hive settles into night. There is nowhere else you need to be. There is nothing left to do tonight. Tomorrow, if you are a forager, there will be meadows to visit, but tomorrow is not now. And now is simply this: warmth and stillness, and the low, comforting hum of a whole family breathing quietly together in the dark. Now imagine, still small, still light as a bee, rising for a moment through the top of the hive, out into a night sky vast and quiet above you, more stars visible than you would ever notice from your ordinary human height, because a bee's eyes, though poor at fine detail, gather light gently and widely, and on a clear night the whole sky might seem to shimmer softly from horizon to horizon. You would not fly far. Bees do not fly at night, and neither in this gentle dream do you. You would simply hover for a moment above the dark, quiet meadow, feel the cool night air brush against your small wings, and then sink back down, gently into the warm hive below, back into the soft press of your sisters, back into the low, comforting hum, and let your small, tired body finally, fully rest. Let that image stay with you now as you slowly return to your own size, your own bed, your own quiet room, carrying with you just a little of that same small, warm stillness, that same trust that nothing more needs to be done tonight, that the meadow will still be there tomorrow, and the flowers, and the whole slow, patient turning of the world, waiting for you exactly as gently as it waited for one small bee, curled safely in her warm, dark cell. Let's return, gently, to the waggle dance once more, because there is one more detail about it that I think you'll find quietly satisfying, a small piece of elegance we skipped past earlier. When a bee performs her dance on the vertical face of the comb, deep inside a dark hive where the sun itself is never visible at all, she still needs some way to indicate direction relative to the sun outside. She solves this using gravity as a stand-in for the sun's position. Straight up the comb represents the direction of the sun itself, and the angle she offsets her dance to the left or right of straight up represents the same angle she would need to turn, left or right of the sun, to reach the flowers she is describing. If the flowers lie directly in line with the sun, she dances straight up. If they lie 90 degrees to the sun's left, she angles her dance 90 degrees to the left of straight up. It is, in effect, a coordinate system, translated seamlessly from open sky to enclosed darkness, from the position of a star 93 million miles away to a small, precise angle traced out by one bee's body against a vertical sheet of wax. There are very few tools human engineers have built that translate one frame of reference into another so simply, so elegantly, using nothing but the pull of gravity and the memory of where the sun was last seen. A bee's memory, for all its precision, is not endless, and there is something almost comforting in that too. A forager who visits a particular patch of flowers faithfully for days will gradually stop returning if that patch stops producing nectar, her attention drifting instead toward better opportunities reported by her sister's dances, her memory of the old patch fading gently rather than holding her, uselessly, to a place that no longer offers what she needs. It's a small, unspoken kind of wisdom, isn't it? Learning to let go of what no longer serves you, gently and without drama, simply redirecting your attention toward wherever the sweetness actually is now. Not every honeybee colony lives in a wooden box tended by a careful keeper. Plenty still live entirely wild, tucked into hollow trees in old forests, into crevices in stone cliffs, into the wall cavities of old barns left quiet and undisturbed for years. These feral colonies follow every one of the same rhythms we've spoken of tonight, the same dances, the same seasonal clustering, the same patient queen laying steadily in the dark, entirely unwitnessed by any human eye, going on about their long, unhurried business in some hollow oak at the edge of a forest nobody has walked through in years. There is something quietly moving about that, the idea that this entire intricate, cooperative world dances in pheromones and royal jelly and all, does not require us at all to keep functioning. It was here long before us, and in the quiet corners of the world, far from any orchard or garden, it continues on its own, exactly as it always has, needing nothing from us but the meadows themselves, left standing, and the old hollow trees, left uncut. Long before European honeybees ever arrived in Australia, Aboriginal communities had already spent countless generations learning the patient art of finding native stingless bee nests hidden deep inside old eucalyptus trees, following faint threads of scent and the quiet, low hum of activity around a small, unremarkable knot in the bark. The honey these native bees produce, sometimes called sugar bag, is thinner and more tart than the honey most of us know, gathered carefully, respectfully, only ever in modest amounts, leaving the colony itself undisturbed and whole, ready to keep producing for the next season, and the one after that, and the one after that, a tradition of careful, sustainable harvesting stretching back tens of thousands of years, far older than any wooden hive box or any Langstroth frame. Resting on the same simple wisdom every gentle beekeeper eventually learns: take only what you need, and always leave enough behind for the ones who made it. Scientists today often describe bees as what is sometimes called an indicator species, meaning their health, or their struggle, tends to reflect the health of the whole surrounding landscape long before more obvious signs would ever appear. A meadow rich in healthy, thriving bee populations is almost always a meadow with clean water nearby, a good variety of native flowering plants, and soil free of harsh chemical residue. A struggling bee population, on the other hand, is often one of the very first quiet signals that something in that same landscape has grown out of balance, long before it would ever be obvious to a human eye simply walking past. In that way, watching over bees has become, almost without anyone planning it that way, a way of watching over everything else too: the water and the soil and the wildflowers and the whole quiet, interconnected fabric that all of them together depend on. Even the architecture of a hive changes gently with the seasons in ways we haven't spoken of yet tonight. In high summer, when the interior risks growing too warm, you'll find far more bees stationed near the entrance, wings beating steadily to draw a cooling current of air through the hive, almost like an old house with every window propped open on a hot afternoon. In the depths of winter, that same entrance narrows almost to nothing, guarded closely, most of the warm air kept deliberately inside, the whole colony behaving less like an open house and more like a small, sealed cabin, holding its warmth close through the coldest, darkest months. The bees themselves adjust this balance constantly, almost like a slow, living thermostat, no single bee ever needing to understand the whole system, each one simply responding to the small, immediate signals of heat or coolness around her, and somehow together keeping the whole structure in near-perfect balance, season after season, year after year. There is a particular flight worth knowing about, one that happens only rarely, on a single especially significant afternoon somewhere in late winter, and it always makes me smile gently to picture it. For weeks and weeks through the coldest part of winter, bees inside the cluster hold everything in, quite literally, rather than soiling the inside of their own hive. An old and deeply ingrained instinct toward cleanliness that holds firm even under real physical strain. Then, on the first day warm enough, sometimes just barely above freezing, with perhaps a little pale winter sun breaking through, the bees will pour out of the hive all at once in what beekeepers fondly call a cleansing flight, a brief, joyful-looking flurry of activity after months of stillness, each bee taking just a few minutes to relieve herself in the open air before returning promptly to the warmth of the cluster. Watching a hive on that first cleansing flight day, beekeepers say, Feels almost like watching a whole neighborhood step outside together after a long, shared illness has finally passed. Everyone blinking in the sudden brightness. Everyone simply glad for a few minutes to feel the sun on their backs again. There is something else worth knowing gently about how a bee's very sex is decided, since it runs on rules quite different from our own. And I think,